When an acrobat falls, you really trust the net will catch them.
Right, you just assume it's going to be there.
Exactly. You weave the ropes, you pull them tight, you anchor the corners to the structure of the tent, and you know the physics of that material will hold.
You rely on it, absolutely.
But what happens when you spend decades, I mean literally decades, weaving a multi-billion-dollar safety net for millions of families across the country, only to realize something terrifying?
Yeah, the realization that the legal material required to catch your own family members simply does not exist.
Right. Today, we are pulling from a massive stack of sources, medical analyses, legal podcast transcripts, news reports, and historical obituaries.
It is a really extensive pile of documents.
It is, and we're using all of it to explore the profound paradox of Rob and Michelle Singer-Reiner.
Which is such a deeply American story when you really look at
It really is, and we want to be incredibly clear with you right up front. We are looking at their lives, their unimaginable loss, and their enduring legacy.
Yes, exactly. This isn't about the darkness of a crime.
Not at all. It's about understanding the incredible light this couple brought into the world before we look at the systemic failures surrounding what happened to them.
You really have to understand who they were first.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before they were advocates and long before they were victims, Rob and Michelle were creators who fundamentally shaped American culture.
They were absolute cultural architects. I mean, if you trace Rob Reiner's evolution, it is a masterclass in American storytelling.
Yeah, he literally grew up in Hollywood royalty.
He did, yeah. His father was the legendary comedy writer Carl Reiner. So Rob stepped into the spotlight as an actor, famously playing Michael Stivic on that groundbreaking 1970s sitcom, All in the Family.
Oh, right. Meathead.
Exactly, Meathead. That role alone was a cultural lightning rod. I mean, it earned him 2 Emmy Awards.
But his true genius, like the thing that would eventually dictate his life's work off screen, that really emerged when he transitioned to directing in the 1980s.
It did. The run of movies he directed is, frankly, almost unbelievable for a single person to accomplish.
Oh, it's wild. You've got This Is Spinal Tap, Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, Misery.
When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men.
Right. They are absolute classics, but they span these wildly different genres.
That's the crazy part.
Yeah, you have a heavy metal mockumentary, and then a really tense courtroom drama, and then a coming-of-age story about kids on a railroad track.
But what's fascinating here is the underlying thread connecting all of those vastly different stories.
Yeah.
Rob Reiner had this boundless, almost radical empathy.
Empathy, yeah, it really comes through in his work.
He possessed a very specific, unique ability to capture genuine human connection without letting it become overly sentimental.
Right. He never tipped over into being cheesy.
Exactly. Audiences trusted him completely because he knew how to find the fundamental goodness, the vulnerability, and the righteousness in his characters. He understood human development on a narrative level.
And then you look at the other half of this powerhouse duo, Michelle Singer-Reiner. She was a creative force in her own right.
Oh, absolutely. She built this really impressive career.
Yeah, she started as a photographer. And looking at her historical sources, it's interesting to note she actually shot the cover photo for Donald Trump's 1987 book, The Art of the Deal.
Which is just a wild historical footnote, honestly.
It really is. And then she later pivoted and became a highly successful film and documentary producer.
But to really understand what drove Michelle, the actual mechanism behind her incredible drive, you have to look at the story of her mother.
Right. Her mother's story is harrowing.
It is deeply foundational to who Michelle became. Her mother, Nicole, was a French-born Holocaust survivor.
Wow.
Yeah. When Nicole was just 17 years old, she was taken to the Drancy internment camp and subsequently deported to Auschwitz.
Unimaginable. Just 17.
And against all odds, she was the only member of her family to survive. She eventually escaped a literal death march in 1944.
Surviving something like that, I mean, it doesn't just shape one life. It rewrites the DNA of an entire family for generations.
It creates a mandate. That profound history of surviving the absolute worst of human atrocities. It instilled in Michelle a lifelong, fierce drive for social justice.
Because you can't just be passive after that.
No, not at all. It wasn't just a passive belief. It gave her a deep empathy for the vulnerable and an active conviction that you have to fight systematically for what is right.
You have to protect the people who cannot protect themselves.
Exactly. So you take Rob's cinematic empathy and his understanding of human vulnerability.
Right.
And you combine it with Michelle's fierce, intergenerational drive for justice. And they finally collide on the set of the 1989 film When Harry Met Sally.
Our sources actually highlight a really brilliant detail about that meeting. Rob was directing the film while going through his own romantic struggles, and his worldview at the time was a bit cynical.
Yeah, he wasn't in a great place emotionally.
No, he wasn't. The original script actually had Harry and Sally walking away from each other at the end. They don't end up together.
Which is hard to even picture now.
I know, right? But then Rob met Michelle.
And she completely flipped his perspective. Michelle literally inspired him to change the ending of the film so that Harry and Sally find each other on New Year's Eve.
They got married that same year, in 1989, and stayed married for 36 years.
36 years in Hollywood, no less.
Yeah, it's like a perfect cinematic collaboration brought to life. Hollywood marriages are notoriously fragile, but Rob and Michelle were a unified, unstoppable force.
Which makes you wonder how two people with that much creative power and that much shared empathy translate their synergy into the real world.
And they did translate it into massive systemic structural change.
They really did. The creative empathy they showed on screen evolved into an aggressive pursuit of real-world political and social advocacy.
Right, like in the late 1990s when Reiner began digging deep into emerging neuroscience.
Specifically focusing on early childhood development. He became fascinated by the science, showing how the first 3 to 5 years of a child's life dictate their future brain architecture.
This is the core of the 0 to 3 concept, right?
Yes, exactly that.
The idea that neuroplasticity during those specific months is creating the actual synaptic pathways for emotional regulation, language, and cognitive function.
You've got it. He realized that, making a great movie is a wonderful contribution to culture, but it doesn't have the profound, lifelong effect of stepping in during that critical developmental window.
Right. A movie doesn't change your brain structure the way early intervention does.
Exactly. A home visit program for a struggling family or an early developmental screening, that literally changes a person's life trajectory.
So he and Michelle decided to build a permanent infrastructure for that intervention. They spearheaded California's Proposition 10 in 1998.
And Prop 10 instituted a tax on tobacco products, specifically to fund early childhood programs.
The numbers here are just staggering. I mean, it raised over $12 billion.
$12 billion, it's almost hard to comprehend.
It is. That money supported 30 million children through the First 5 California network, funding health screenings, preschools, and comprehensive family support.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what Rob and Michelle did was utilize their mastery of Hollywood marketing to translate incredibly dense, complex neuroscience into accessible, urgent public policy.
They created the I Am Your Child campaign.
Right. They produced primetime television specials. They handed out educational videos directly to parents.
They basically storyboarded public health like a movie, creating a narrative where the taxpayer felt like the hero actively saving a baby's brain.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Wait, I need to push back on this a little bit because we see celebrity vanity causes all the time.
Oh, sure. All the time.
Usually it's a fancy gala, a ribbon-cutting photo op, and then the real lobbyists and politicians take over. So how does a guy whose day job is directing rom-coms and courtroom dramas actually sit down and draft a state tax initiative without getting eaten alive by Sacramento politicians?
Well, because it wasn't a vanity project. It was a rigorous commitment to the actual mechanics of state policy.
They didn't just write a check.
No, they didn't just raise awareness and walk away. They hired the lawyers, they helped draft the specific language of the ballot initiative, and then Rob served as the first chair of the First 5 Commission for 7 years.
7 years. Wow.
Yes. He was directly overseeing the allocation of those tobacco tax funds. They built the machine and then they operated it.
And their advocacy wasn't even limited to children. They also co-founded the American Foundation for Equal Rights.
Right, which successfully challenged California's Proposition 8 ban on same-sex marriage.
That paved the way for federal marriage equality. The sources also document that they were major Democratic fundraisers and activists.
They poured their resources, their time, and their literal hearts into protecting vulnerable people and expanding civil rights.
They took their massive privilege and used it to institutionalize wellness for millions of families they would never even meet.
It's a devastating irony, though.
It really is.
They successfully leveraged California's massive legal infrastructure to protect millions of strangers' children. But when it came to their own home, it was the strict legal infrastructure of American mental health care that left them completely powerless.
Which brings us to the most difficult part of our deep dive. We are moving from their immense public protection of families to the unimaginable private tragedy that struck their own.
Yeah, this is where the story shifts.
On December 14th, 2025, The 78-year-old director and his 70-year-old wife were found deceased in their Brentwood home by their daughter, Romy.
The medical examiner confirmed that both Rob and Michelle died from multiple sharp force injuries.
The suddenness of it is staggering, but the sources we've gathered rightly focus on the profound vacuum left behind, prioritizing the people who survived them.
Absolutely. We want to center their children, Jake and Romy.
Their public statement is just absolutely heartbreaking in its simplicity. They didn't focus on the event itself.
No, they focused on the parents. They said they weren't just our parents, they were our best friends.
The shockwaves hit Hollywood immediately and then radiated out across the nation. The Reiners were deeply, universally beloved.
A joint statement was released by their lifelong friends, icons like Billy Crystal, Larry David, Martin Short, and Albert Brooks.
That statement was incredibly moving. They spoke about Rob's mastery as a storyteller and how he and Michelle were a special force together, dynamic, unselfish, and inspiring.
And they ended their tribute with a quote from Rob's favorite film, It's a Wonderful Life.
Right. The quote is, "Each man's life touches so many other lives, and when he isn't around, he leaves an awful hole, doesn't he?"
It perfectly encapsulates the precise emotional reality of their passing.
It does. And looking across the political spectrum of our sources, you see that reality reflected in intensely polarized ways.
Yeah, the reactions were definitely split along political lines.
Figures like former President Barack Obama, President Joe Biden, and California Governor Gavin Newsom issued tributes honoring the Rainers' lifelong commitment to human goodness.
Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump took to social media to mock Rob Reiner's death, claiming it was due to Trump derangement syndrome.
And we want to be very clear to you listening right now. We are neutrally reporting this from the source material. We are absolutely not taking a political side here.
No, we're just conveying the ideas contained in the original coverage.
Exactly. As observers synthesizing these documents, this stark contrast just highlights the highly volatile political landscape the Rainers spent so much of their lives navigating and trying to improve.
To truly understand the scope of this tragedy, though, we have to look past the immediate grief and examine the systemic context.
Right, because the "why does this keep happening" question matters far more than the "how did it happen" question.
And to explain that, we do have to talk about their son, Nick Reiner.
We are bringing him up strictly to explain the clinical and legislative failure at the heart of this story.
Yes. Following the deaths, Nick was arrested, charged with murder, pleaded not guilty, and is currently held in a mental health facility.
But this isn't a story about a criminal mastermind.
Not at all. The clinical analyses in our stack detail a young man who struggled with severe addiction, specifically meth and heroin.
Alongside a diagnosis of schizophrenia since he was 15 years old.
15. His parents loved him deeply. They tried absolutely everything.
Over the years, Nick had been through 17 different rehab programs.
17. And at one point in 2020, he was even placed in a mental health conservatorship.
They even collaborated with him on a 2015 film called Being Charlie.
Right, Rob directed that. It was a semi-autobiographical story to try and help channel Nick's struggles with addiction into art.
They supported him, they practiced tough love, they did every single thing the experts told them to do.
Which brings us to the core paradox of this case. Rob and Michelle Reiner had infinite wealth.
Infinite.
They had unparalleled connections. They had access to the absolute best medical, psychiatric, and legal care on the planet.
But the terrifying reality of the U.S. legal and medical system is this. Parents have essentially zero legal options to force treatment on an adult child suffering from severe mental illness and addiction.
Here's where it gets really interesting and fundamentally broken.
It's like having a state-of-the-art hospital, fully staffed with the best doctors in the world, ready and waiting.
But the front door is locked from the inside.
Exactly. The patient's illness has literally stolen their ability to turn the key. You can stand outside and beg them to open it. You can pay for the building, but you cannot legally force the door open.
The aha moment here is realizing that our mental health laws were largely written or reformed in the 1970s.
Right.
They were designed as a civil rights victory to stop the forced, often abusive institutionalization of the one flew over the cuckoo's nest era.
So, in America, if your adult child is severely mentally ill, the system prioritizes their autonomy and individual liberty over everything else.
The system is actually functioning exactly as it was designed to function.
But the blind spot in that legislation is massive.
Oh, it's huge. The law assumes the patient has the cognitive ability to exercise that liberty rationally.
Right. It assumes the brain experiencing schizophrenia and severe meth addiction can somehow weigh the pros and cons of checking into a facility.
Precisely. To secure a conservatorship or forced treatment, the legal threshold is incredibly high.
You usually have to prove imminent, immediate danger to self or others, right?
Yes, or grave disability, which is very narrowly defined by the courts.
Chronic cognitive decline, or the slow-motion tragedy of severe addiction, it rarely meets that strict legal standard until it is far too late.
It leaves families entirely on their own when an adult family member loses the cognitive capacity to choose health.
Your safety as a parent, and even long-term safety of the child, is treated as secondary to their immediate civil liberty to refuse care.
So Rob and Mikkel followed all the protocols. They trusted the experts.
They engaged with the legal avenues available to them, and the system gave them absolutely nothing.
It is the ultimate heartbreaking irony.
They spent decades successfully building safety nets for millions of other people's children. They changed the entire landscape of early childhood intervention in California.
But the American mental health system was too legally paralyzed to let them save their own son.
When you synthesize all of the sources, all the obituaries, the legislation they championed, and the systemic failures they faced, it becomes incredibly clear.
The story of Rob and Michelle Singer Reiner is vastly larger than the events of December 14, 2025.
Their legacy is absolutely not defined by how they died, but by how fiercely and compassionately they lived.
They were an extraordinary unified force for good.
They shaped the movies we still quote to each other, they fought for the civil rights we rely on, and they built institutions of care that will outlast us all.
They really did.
So, what does this all mean for you listening? As we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder.
It is so easy to get lost in the sensational headlines of a tragedy like this.
It is. To focus on a pending trial or to speculate about what happens next in a courtroom. But instead of looking at the perpetrator or the broken system that failed this family, I want you to consider the millions of children currently benefiting from the first 5 California programs.
The scale of that impact is still ongoing.
Exactly. Every single time a child in California gets an early developmental screening, every time a struggling family receives a home visit from a nurse, Rob and Michelle Reiner are still working.
Their empathy is still echoing out into the world, actively catching people who are falling.
But their story also forces us to ask a crucial, agonizing question. How can we as a society fix the gaping holes in our mental health laws so that families aren't left fighting a losing battle entirely on their own?
How do we finally weave that last part of the safety net?
Yeah.
The one that catches the people falling right inside our own homes.
This raises an important question that goes far beyond policy debates or funding allocations. It's about how we fundamentally redesign our legal definition of compassion.
To care for the most fractured among us without stripping away their humanity.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We appreciate you taking the time to explore this incredibly profound, distinctly American story with us.
Take care of yourselves out there.
And take care of each other.